Hello and welcome. This is Social Studies, Voices from Across America. I'm Bill Wood.
And I'm Peter Goldsmith.
It's good to see you, Peter. It's been a while. We're going to talk today about voting. It's probably the most important thing in America right now is voting, getting people off their couches, off their duffs, out of their cars, and into a voting booth at some point. Agree, Peter?
Absolutely agreed, Bill. You know, these are our 2018 midterm elections. They are extremely important. And again, as we say all the time, it doesn't matter which lever you pull or which button on the touch screen you touch. You need to get out there and make your vote heard and count. Very important.
I can't believe the people who are arguing now and decided to stay home. For example, in 2016, only 58% of the eligible voters voted. 56 to 58, those are the numbers that you see, and you're getting 90% of the people complaining. What gives?
Absolutely, Bill, 100%. If you don't vote, then keep your mouth shut. But there's no reason not to vote. You know, we're not going to start waving flags here, but we're happy to wave them when they're valid. Men and women have given their lives for us to vote. Men and women have put their lives on the line for 200 years in this country, so we have the right to vote. People as right-wing as army generals and as left-wing as Karl Marx have said the United States of America is the only country in the world, some people say Great Britain now as well, that you can have revolution at the ballot box. If you don't like what's going on in this country, if you don't like what the government is saying or doing, fine. Go down when you have a chance and push the lever. This year, it's November the 6th, 2018. Get registered and vote. Bill?
It's absolutely mandatory. In fact, there are companies now that are using it as a marketing slogan, is go vote, using none other than the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. Let's listen.
You better think about what you're trying to do to me. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. Oh, freedom, 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 yeah, freedom, freedom, freedom.
What more could you ask for? Pictures of America, pictures of American voters, and the Queen of Soul asking you to vote. What you want an engraved invitation? What more do you need?
Yeah. And you know what, Bill? I looked up a couple of statistics, as I'm sure you did on your end. And one of the things I found out, who is eligible to vote? And here are the four things that I found. Number one, you need to be a United States citizen. Number two, you need to be at least 18 years of age. Number three, you cannot be a convicted felon, although that's changing in some states. I don't think it will for the 2018 election, but it may shortly after that. And number two, you have to be a resident of the United States. Now, what that means is you can be somewhere else as long as you're a legal resident and you can have a mail-in vote. But those are the four things. And that pretty much includes all of us over the age of 18. And there is no age ceiling for those of us who are a little bit older, as you and I, Bill. You could, if you, God willing, you live to 115, you can vote when you're 115.
That doesn't say anything about Russian citizens, members of the KGB, or at the insiders at the Kremlin, does it? That's not included with an asterisk in that list?
No, they vote in their own special way, Bill. They have the special computers tied into our voting machines. But we don't even want to go there because that'll take us on a really bad tangent.
Yeah, that's the Alice in Wonderland hole that we don't want to get involved in.
Exactly.
So we talked about who can vote. Why do people not vote? That's something that came across my eyes. And I think the one thing here is that why people don't vote, the first thing on the list is registration. And there's
Yeah.
been arguments about registration. It's too difficult. Even the day that it's held on a Tuesday instead of a weekend day when most people don't work and they might have more opportunity to vote. But they say registration is the number one reason why people don't vote.
And I think for a lot of people, the answer is I don't think my vote will mean anything.
Yes.
Now, here's another statistic. You know, I did my homework this week, Bill, so I've got a lot of statistics to weigh you down with. The millennials are the worst voting group of all. Only 19% of people between the ages of 18 and 29 voted in the last election. For those of us who are subscribers to AgnitusLife.com and who are watching this podcast, congratulations to those of us 60 and over, because we vote in the highest percentage. Most of us, I don't know if we have nothing else to do or we're bored, but either way, we do vote. And truthfully, not to be flippant about it, I think the reason we vote is because we've been around long enough and we know how important a vote is, and we know how important it is upon us to let our voices be heard.
That the second thing on the list is education. And practically every survey that I found indicated that people with more education, higher education, voted more. Maybe because they see the importance of it, have seen how it can affect their lives. And nowadays, and especially now, the thinking nowadays is that education is under challenge, especially public education is under challenge by many people who think that it ought to be privatized and we shouldn't have free public education at the expense of the government. I think that's another show that we could do, but I think that's education. More people vote if they have higher educations.
Well, I think that's true, Bill, but I'll tell you something else. In 1965, we had the Voter Registration Act. It was actually signed into law by LBJ, not LeBron James, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the idea behind the Voter Registration Act was to outlaw discriminatory voting practices. And one of the things that was discriminatory was a literacy test. Many people, mostly African Americans, were given a literacy test, and many of them couldn't pass it. So in 1965, that went away by law. So yes, the higher education, the more percentage vote, but still, knowing that you have the right to vote and knowing that what you say may or may not change your life. You may be extremely unhappy with the president we have now in the administration now. You may be extremely happy with it. Either way, you have the opportunity to vote against it or for it. And that's what we're talking about here. Nobody's telling anyone how to vote. We're saying we should have a much higher turnout than 56%. The research that I did said, and this was done by, I'm just going to look over here, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's a worldwide organization which rates the countries which vote the highest and the lowest. We turned up number 26 out of 32 on the list. Just to give you an idea, number 25 right ahead of us was Estonia. So we're not doing real well here, and we need to do better.
It's every time I think about voting rights. In fact, when the first time I voted for Barack Obama, I remember riding away on my motorcycle at the time from the voting booth, thinking how important it was. And the picture that came into my mind, I'll never forget the picture of the 4 little girls who were killed in the Birmingham church bombing because the church was the center for voting rights in Alabama. Every time I think about staying home from not voting, I think about those four little girls who were just playing in Sunday school and got blown away because people didn't want them or their parents to vote. It's a colossal thing that we need to address, this apathy. In fact, that's another one of the things. Number 3 on the list is two parties may not be enough. We have Democrats and Republicans. We have the Green Party. We had the Peace and Freedom Party at one time. We have libertarians, and that's a whole nother issue that there are people that have us confusing liberty with freedom. But two parties may not be enough, and that maybe at some point in America's future, we may need to go to a parliamentary form of government. I don't know that will ever happen in my lifetime, but I think that's something that more people need to have their feelings represented in government.
Yeah, Bill, I go back to this table that I have here, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. First in that is Belgium. It's mandatory that you vote in Belgium, and their turnout is over 90%. Second is Sweden. But number 6 is interesting. It's Israel. The reason I say that's interesting is Israel has something like 49 different parties. So to be able to vote in Israel, you probably have to start a month before and sort out all the parties and everything and figure out who's saying what and to whom and how. And still, they're number 6 in the world on that. So when people say, oh, well, the Green Party confuses thing and the Libertarian confuses, we have two parties. Well, that's what we had, but that's not what we can have. And I think that brings us to an interesting point about conservatives and progressives. A conservative person says, this is what we've had in the past and this is what we should have now. A progressive person says, this is what we have now and this is what we can have in the future to make it better. I'm not talking about a political conservative. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people's concept of how to build our nation into a better, more fully accepting nation. Okay, just because we had a two-party system up till now is great. It doesn't mean we can't have a third or fourth party who are realistic in the voting process. I know that the Green Party is on the ticket in a lot of states. Unfortunately, the Green Party doesn't get any votes, and it's more or less looked upon as someone who pulls votes away, usually from the more liberal Democratic candidate. So everybody who's a Democrat gets all excited about, well, if this Green Party person hadn't run, we would have gotten all these extra votes. Yeah. That's a bunch of baloney too. I don't believe in that. You vote your conscience.
I agree with you on that. And I think while you were talking, it came to me, and I never thought about this before, but we need to understand that conservative is not necessarily a bad thing. There's a difference between conservatism and fundamentalism. People that fundamentalists flew planes into the World Trade Center. Not necessarily. I'm not saying conservatives are going to one day fly planes into another building.
No, I think conservative
fundamentalism could fly a plane into a building, and that's the scary part of what's happening in America, is that fundamentalists are trying to take their religious belief, convert that into America was founded as a religious country. Quite the contrary. It was founded as a country that was supposed to be free of religious servitude or religious bondage. And we're trying to do the same thing now, of applying fundamentalist values to the overall government. I think that's a very tragic place to be.
Yeah, I think conservatism is a good thing. I think most of us are financially conservative. Some of us are socially liberal. But I think, conservatism is not a bad word at all. It's a good word. Yes. I think that people need to get away from that kind of strict sense of, as you said, almost fundamentalism. Most of us are conservative in many of the things we do, and that's just fine. I mean, and that's part of the greater discussion here, Bill, about, what do we want this country to look like in 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 10 years down the line? How do we want to structure a government that can take care of itself, meaning its people, because we are the government? Say, well, it's the state who says this. It's the government, the county who mandates this. We are the state. We are the county. We are the country. That's why your vote is important now. So down the line, when problems arise, which they always do, and decisions have to be made, we have people who at least agree somewhat with what we think. Those are the people we voted for. Those are our brothers and sisters in office carrying out their job. I'll just give you a little anecdotal thing. Bill, when I was a young guy, my father was very much involved in politics. He was a campaign manager for lieutenant governor and state senators in the state of New York. And I spoke to one of the senators, who was a good friend of his, and he voted, he was very anti-abortion, very anti. And I asked him once, and I said, well, doesn't women's rights come into this? And he said, Peter, as an elected official, I have to vote the way my constituents want me to vote. I have overwhelming evidence from my specific group of constituents that are against abortion. And so I vote that way. Now, I'm not saying, I was a young guy. I was probably 16 or 18 at that time. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's an interesting way to look at politics. And it's an interesting way to look at who you vote for. If you vote for Mrs. A or Mrs. B, you're going to get a difference in how they carry out your wishes, how they vote on different matters that are important to all of us. So that's where voting comes in. And I want to touch something really briefly also. Millennials. We all know a lot of millennials. I teach at the local community college here. Most of my students say, I don't want to vote. Why should I vote? I don't feel like voting. It doesn't matter. Who cares what one vote is? Who cares what I say? And to me, it gets me really annoyed because, number one, you should be proud to vote. I love to vote. I love to wake up. I never vote early. I never vote I never mail my vote in. I love getting up in the morning before I go to school to work, going to the voting place. And again, now we have the new machines here in North Carolina. You guys from California are all outdated. Yeah. We're very hip here. Exactly. We have touch screens. Yeah, but I love that. Yeah. I love that. I love going to the vote. But you know what? And I have the sticker. I wear the sticker all the time on my shirt for the whole day. I voted. I'm a part of this republic. I'm concerned. I care about what goes on. And to me, I think every American should feel that way.
You're absolutely right. In fact, that takes me to the fourth most important reason why people don't vote is apathy and burnout. And you could include some young people in there who are apathetic, especially if all they see are old white guys who don't represent their interest, look like their dad, who they have all sorts of problems with, their grandfather. So apathy and burnout. And it's saying in this study that I found, it said we use voting as a tool to transmit to others who we are. So we find our self-identity in conservatism or in progressive beliefs, liberalism some people use, but conservative and liberal, progressive and conservative, we identify with that. And we say, I would never vote for X because I'm a conservative and that's what I believe in.
Right.
And we'll vote for people that we don't know what they stand for because they label themselves as progressive or liberal or progressive or conservative instead of paying attention. And the one thing I've heard of late is that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something that we could stand back and watch. That's the messiness of democracy and the noise and sometimes the mob rule of democracy, that you got to get out there and participate. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point, Bill. But let me just say one thing. Take it easy on the old white guys here, because I know one right now who's really a good guy.
The old
Anyway,
black guys.
no.
Wait a minute. The old black guys aren't any better. I remember the guys sitting on the corner. Hey, boy, what are you doing? How come you're not? I remember all those people. So,
No, as long as you put the word old in there.
Yeah.
But, you're right, Bill. And we have all these things. We always try to put obstacles in front of ourselves. It's really interesting because most of the things that we do as a people are relatively straightforward if we don't impose obstacles. One of the things I was reading about is everybody now is afraid of voter fraud. Voter fraud is a big issue. So you're going to have IDs to vote. You're going to have a driver's license or an official ID to vote. Well, first of all, the statistics that I got, I'm going to bring them up here. Forbes actually was the thing. There were 36 cases of voter fraud all throughout the country in all the elections in 1.1 billion ballots cast. I don't even know what that percentage is, but it's 36 out of 1 billion is pretty darn small. But still, many states are setting up things where you must have voter ID. You must have a picture ID to vote. Now, once again, who has a picture ID? People who drive cars, people who are educated, and people who are middle class and upper class. Who doesn't have a voter ID? Who doesn't have a picture ID? Poor people, very old people, a lot of people of color. So we're seeing that some of these rules are set to be against a segment of our population which usually votes a certain way.
Personally, I think if we had a national primary, and then this year, say on October 6th, and then on November 6th, when the vote happens, when the midterm elections happen, November 6th, where you're expected to be there. But if we had a national primary on October the 6th, and then a vote on November the 6th, it would be less expensive. More people might be in tune to what's happening, and you don't have 6-8 months between your primary and the national election. That's just my personal thing, and I think there's some evidence to indicate that that might be possible. But short of that, we do need to participate in this process and let more people be out there participating and voting and being involved in the democracy.
No, absolutely, Bill. And you said it before at the start of when we're talking about 56% of the people voted in 2016. Just as a contrast to that, in 2008, it was 70%. Okay. So in 8 years, we've lost 14% of the voters. So, that's a trend that we need not to follow, that we need to reverse. It would be really nice if, the person who won the election I'm talking about the president now, would really get 51% of all the people. I have it that there's between 245, I have 2 or 3 different sources, but they all say between 245 and 250 million eligible voters, of which 157 million are registered and 138 million voted in 2016. Wouldn't it be nice if we had 225 million people voting so that the person who won really did get a majority of the voters, not a majority of the minority that voted?
Yeah.
That's really where I think we want to go to.
I think it's important. Polling has become very scientific. It's not accurate. They might have plus or minus 4 or 5%, whatever.
Sure.
But polling has indicated that people are in favor of some things, like women's rights to choose in the abortion issue. People generally want more gun control, and this is not 5 or 6 out of 10. This is like 8 out of 10. They want more gun control. But what we have done by staying home and not participating, the apathy and the burnout has allowed people to dictate what they want in the political process. If most of the people, 8 out of 10, want this, then we don't have a representative government if the government is not allowing this to happen. We have people
Right.
that want to choose whatever they want, and to make that happen, we've talked about fundamentalism, how that's different than conservatism and progressive. That fundamentalism is kind of dangerous in the political process here in America. We not make fun of, but we are sharply critical of fundamentalists in other countries who believe different than we do, but we are not critical about our own fundamentalists here in America who generally believe different than the mainstream, and some who are their idea of reform is to privatize public education, to privatize prisons, and to, in some cases, to privatize social services, that like Social Security. They want you to be responsible for your own Social Security and to eliminate Social Security. But they're setting aside more and more money for bombs, more and more money for military preparedness. We need to make our voices heard, and we don't have a lot of opportunity. There are people who would put a for sale sign on the lawn of Capitol Hill, on the lawn of the Supreme Court, and we're at a place now, depending on what happens with the current nominee for the Supreme Court, we're at a place where the president could control all branches of government, the executive, the congressional, and the legislative, and the judicial. That's not what was designed at the beginning by the framers of the Constitution. They had problems, but they didn't want a king. They wanted someone who was beholden to the people, and by staying home, you're allowing just the opposite to occur.
Yeah, Bill, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. We're short of time. I know we have to go. I know usually you keep the clock, but I've been looking at it too. I'd like to do more about this voting stuff. I'd like to talk about some larger issues about, can homeless people vote? Should homeless people be able to vote? What about the Electoral College? Do we need that anymore, or is that just in the way? Are felons ever going to get the right to vote? Should they ever get the right to vote? I think that I'd like to do another podcast, maybe a part 2 to this one. I know we have some stuff coming up on, we're going to talk about healthcare and things. I know that's scheduled for us, and Medicare, and it's going to be open season for Choose Your Providers. We need to really do that as well. But I think before Election Day, I think it's incumbent upon us, if you agree, to do a second part here and bring up those issues and those things and clarify a lot of this stuff about voting laws and things like that. I think it's a good start today, but I'd like to follow it up with a little bit more. We're open to any ideas, good, bad, or in between. We just want to hear from you. As Bill always says, we're trying to build community here, and you are the community we're trying to build. So help us build it and stay in tune with us.
Want you to vote, but most of all, in addition to voting, we want to create community with you, with 2 people who believe desperately in voting. So until the next time, take care of each other and respect each other.
Peace.
You can get this podcast. You can tell someone else about this podcast. It's available through YouTube, through iTunes, and through Google Play. Let's hear from you. Let us know what you think so that we can be in community with you. And there is a way to contact us. That's at peter@AgnitusLife.com or Bill at AgnitusLife.com. That's our email addresses. Let's hear from you. Let's open up the forum.